them at the worst parts, the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello and get lost or get dead. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at comic book movies that were poorly received upon release, but challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. This week, we're talking the 2010 film Jonah Hex. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the man with the fastest comic book recall in the West, Andrew Williams. Are you ready for this one, Andrew?
I am.
Are you excited for this one? Are you excited to talk about Jonah Hex? Have you been dying to talk about Jonah Hex?
Chris, don't put the onus of that on me.
Let me ask you this then. Have you seen this movie before this week, before preparing for this
I saw
podcast?
this in theaters.
Wow, you were one of the 15 people, huh?
Yeah, there was all three of us in there. I think it was me and my sister. We went to Alamo because we would see everything at Alamo. But genuinely, honestly, like, it's something where I'm like, there is no... I can't imagine why. I can't imagine I was like super hyped seeing the trailers or anything. I mean, I probably thought Josh Brolin was going to be pretty good as the main character, but like,
it's a comic book movie and Andrew has to see it.
It's weird though, some of the ones that I ended up missing, but apparently I didn't miss this one.
I did not see this in theaters. I remember the trailers, like I remember it coming out, and I remember thinking like, wow, that's a weird character to adapt. And the movie came and went very quickly. I can't even say like I heard a lot of negative stuff about it, because literally I didn't know anyone that went and saw it. I didn't know anybody that had an opinion about it. So yeah, I didn't see it in theaters. I forgot about this movie, but watched it.
You and
this
I didn't
week.
even know each other yet. Like I
know.
I don't like it's weird to think about. Like, because it wouldn't have even been like, hey, Andrew saw that movie, because you and I weren't talking to each other yet. So
yeah, 2010. I can't believe how old this movie is. It's 12 years old now, and especially when you look at this cast. I mean, I guess for some of them, they would hit big after this movie. Some had already hit big, but in retrospect, one of the best casts of any movies we've ever talked about. I mean, there's genuinely great actors assembled for this movie. It's crazy.
There is. It's unbelievable, and we'll talk about that more later. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into it. Like I said, I watched the movie this week, and now we're going to record our podcast about it. And our podcast is all about the positives. It's all about the good stuff. And that's, well, as we say, that's the challenge, right? Let's get into it.
Well,
Andrew.
folks, thanks for joining us for Jonah Hex. We've, I
mean, I guess, people listening to this know the runtime already. I am very curious how long we can keep this up. But let's set the stage first. The movie was released June 18th, 2010. This was intended to be a summer blockbuster, made on a budget of $47 million. Pretty modest at the box office, Andrew. Worldwide. This movie brings in $11 million. Less than a fourth of its production budget. This is like the epitome of a box office bomb, a flop, whatever term you want to use. DVD sales are not going to recoup the budget. This movie was a huge financial loss for Warner Brothers. Didn't help that it was not received well critically, just a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics. Audiences is 20%, which is one of the lowest audience scores I've ever seen. So there is, if there's a devoted fan base to this movie, they are very small, and I have never heard from them.
Oof. That's about the only word I can think to describe such things. Oof.
You see numbers like that, that big of a flop and that low of a critic score, and genuinely, honestly, you think to yourself, it can't be that bad. Like, you look at the poster, you look at the trailers, you look at the cast, you're like, it might not be great, but that was kind of my thoughts going into the movie, and we'll dive in more into my thoughts as I watch the movie later in the episode. But yeah, that just...
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, oof is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The movie was written by the team of Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor. They are a creative duo, probably most known for the Crank movies, Crank and its sequel, Crank 2 High Voltage, which they wrote and directed. No stranger to our show, we've talked about them before. They were the directors of Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, a movie that we both really enjoyed.
Yeah. Odd that they just wrote this.
It's odd they just wrote this, and odd they just directed Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, because typically they're doing it all. They're seeing it all the way through. Now, at one point, they were supposed to be directing this movie, but they exited the project due to some creative differences from the studio. I imagine they're known for a little bit of edginess and strange humor. Maybe they were trying to push things a little bit too far for a studio intending to make a intended blockbuster franchise movie, but yeah, they just end up as writers on this one. For the director's chair, they bring in Jimmy Hayward. This is his live-action directorial debut. Most notably, before this, he was the director of Horton Hears a Who, the animated Dr. Seuss movie, which I really enjoy. Have you seen that one, Andrew? Horton Hears a Who?
Not recently. Maybe time to revisit it.
Jim Carrey, Steve Carell. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It better than How the Grinch Stole Christmas. No, better than the live action.
Live action. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right. I'm willing to follow you on this now.
All right. Jimmy Hayward, most of his career spent in animation. He was actually an animator all the way back on that show Reboot. Andrew, do you remember Reboot?
I do remember Reboot.
One of the first, if not the first, CG cartoons.
Yeah, like fully CG. Yeah.
Yeah, you go back and look at it now, and it's nightmarish. It was horrifying, but cutting edge at the time.
At the time, but yeah, I mean, this guy, a long run with Pixar being an animator, Toy Story 2, Bugs Life, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo. I mean, not a lightweight.
Nope. As far as directing, he directed this in 2010. He directed an animated movie called Freebirds in 2013, and hasn't directed a feature since then.
Well,
the world awaits the return of Jimmy Hayward. There were some reshoots on this movie done by Francis Lawrence, who's another director we've talked about. He's the director of Constantine. So he was involved a little bit creatively. You look into the production of this movie, and it seems to be pretty troubled, to say the least. A lot of reshoots, a lot of tight deadlines, a lot of unhappy actors whenever they reflect back on it. And in the end, we just got an 81-minute movie. I've got to imagine that wasn't the plan all along. So I don't know what'll happen to that production in that editing room, but it was a nightmare to get through by many accounts.
Yeah, I mean, putting it bluntly, Brolin has not spoken positively about his time on this film. He's been kind of the most vocal, mostly because he entered into a lot of he did something with Marvel that was pretty big. And then he was, I can't remember what it was. I remember he was
Deadpool 2, biggest thing he's done with Marvel, for sure.
The biggest thing with Marvel thing. And then he was linked to Batman in BVS for a while, and I remember people were like, started asking him about Jonah Hex and that experience a lot, and he kind of was very open about how it was a hectic production. He mentioned once they had to shoot like 66 pages of script in like 12 days, which is just like
that's insane.
A breakneck page. I mean, 66 pages is like typically half your script at least. And shooting it in 12 days when most movies get like 2 to 3 months, that's just insane. You know, that's a very rare thing to be able to do and pull off. So, and that's honestly that if the film has any legacy, it's probably stuff like that. Just the less than flattering comments from some of the people involved.
But you know who is going to speak positively on this movie, Andrew?
Who?
Well, we are.
Oh,
that's what our podcast is. That's what we're going to do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
After his family is murdered by the evil Quentin Turnbull and he is left for dead, Jonah Hex wanders the Wild West as a lawless bounty hunter with the supernatural gift of talking to the dead. When Turnbull resurfaces with plans to attack the nation on the 4th of July, the U.S. Army recruits Hex for assistance, knowing he won't be able to say no to a chance at revenge. The simple tale we have here, Andrew.
Yep.
Wild West with machine guns, and he can resurrect the dead and talk to them. That's it. Tale as old as time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is, everybody can, identify with this. There's a bit of an everyman sense to that story of just, we can all relate to that.
I see my face in the scars of Jonah Hex.
Yeah. Dude, I've been saying that for years.
It's true. It makes me cry. All right, let's jump into the cast of this film, starting with the best performance and best casting of the movie. Every week, we recognize one person who's gone above and beyond the call of duty and elevated the quality of the entire film with their performance, or at the very least, elevating the role that they were given. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, kick us off. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Jonah Hex?
There was two people I was looking at mostly by the end of this movie. But I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Josh Brolin as Jonah Hex, just because he's really giving it what he's got. He's really trying. He's making the most of the space he's got on the screen. He's making the most of the script. He's really, really giving it everything he's got. You can tell that this, regardless of the final product, this was something that he, really, was interested in doing. He wanted to give it his all, and it comes off, by and large, that he's really given it the best that he's got. I, honestly, if you told me that Josh Brolin was going to play Jonah Hex again, I really wouldn't have a problem with that. I think it's a perfectly good, if not great, casting that you could do a lot more with. But he's really given it everything he's got here. He's got the kind of, obviously the prosthetics and everything they do is very in depth. It does look really good. He plays the character well. He's got the right sense of like sardonic humor, as well as kind of the grizzled toughness all nailed. That's Josh Brolin, really. But yeah, I'm giving it to him. He's really given it everything he's got. And Josh Brolin is Jonah Hex.
Yeah, I mean, also getting my Mark Strong Award. I mean, it's Josh Brolin in a Western. The man he can do a lot. I'm not saying he doesn't have range, but like anytime he's in a Western, I mean, this is a few years after No Country for Old Men and the same year as True Grit, which is very funny to me that in 2010, you could go to the movies and see Josh Brolin in Jonah Hex and Josh Brolin in True Grit. True Grit being on one end of the spectrum for Westerns and Jonah Hex being on the other. I'll leave it at that. But his deadpan delivery, his grit, to use a word from that title. I mean, it's perfect for this type of role, for Westerns, for being an outlaw, being a bounty hunter. It makes total sense. And that's not to say like he's phoning it in or just doing the bare minimum. He's very good at this. Right. And no matter what's happening around him in this movie, which is some bizarre stuff at times, he is always dialed into the character. I think he nails it. Mark Strong Award winner. I gotta agree with you, Andrew.
I agree.
Let's move through the rest of this cast, and I'm gonna start with who I'm thinking was your runner-up for a Mark Strong Award, which would be John Malkovich as Quentin Turnbull. Was this in consideration for you, Andrew?
Not really, but it was a good performance. This wasn't the one I was really thinking of.
All right. But he's a scenery-chewing bad guy, which I know you love.
He's John Malkovich. Like, what is there to say, really? I mean, he's one of the greatest actors. I think John
Malkovich may be the greatest character actor ever.
Which is weird to say, because, like, he feels more famous than your standard character actor. But like, he's still, he can blend in anywhere. You
think of like his best movies, his best roles. It is rarely, if ever, like a John Malkovich vehicle or something that he's starring in. Right. It's like, man, he's super memorable in Con Air. He's memorable as a bad guy here. Even being John Malkovich, he's not exactly the lead of that movie, right? I mean, he's usually playing a bad guy, playing a side character. He's on the Netflix show Space Force right now, which... he's probably my favorite character on that show. Yeah, he can do comedy, he can do menacing, he can do everything. And he's got this weird delivery and speech pattern. Like, people do Christopher Walken impressions all the time, but like, if you can do a good Malkovich, I'll tip my hat to you. It's very strange and specific, but he always makes it work. Like, even if it's for comedy, if it's for villainous roles, it's fantastic. He's great. Greatest character actor of all time. Or I'm going to give him that title officially. Greatest character actor of all time.
I support it.
Megan Fox is in this movie as Lila Black, sort of a love interest for our character. Sometimes she's caught up in the damsel in distress role. Sometimes she's handling stuff all on her own. She can be a tough chick. I know this character is from the comics, but I can't really tell you I'm the biggest Jonah Hex reader, so I'm not super familiar. I'm not sure how one-to-one this translation is, but Megan Fox, I mean, 2010, early 2010s, probably up till 2015, she was getting cast and everything. It's almost like Hollywood knew they had a straw in their hands, but didn't know exactly how to use her, so she just kind of just appeared in everything, including this weird Western movie. And, I mean, her role is to be cool and pretty, and she does just that.
Yeah, exactly. She's, like I said, she gets to get the hits in occasionally, and like I said, sometimes the damsel in distress, but does get and plays a big, sizable role in the climax. So, yeah, she does exactly what she needs to do for this.
Michael Fassbender is in this movie, in this stacked cast of a movie. Excuse me, Mark Strong Award winner Michael Fassbender. Pretty sure he got one somewhere back there.
Yeah.
Plays the character Burke, who's sort of like the right-hand man to John Malkovich's character. He wears a bowler hat. It's kind of his signature look. He's got a lot of tattoos, and he's very hard to understand. That's Michael Fassbender in this movie.
No, he was the guy that I was thinking about, the other one, just because my Fassbender runs with this. He's not on screen very much. He doesn't have a whole lot to do here, but like, he's running around, he's zipping around. Like, he mentioned that his character was kind of like the Riddler or like Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange, and you can like see those threads in the character. But yeah, he's having a blast with this. He's being like I said, it was more memorable to me than I thought it was going to be what he was doing. So he was the other one I was considering for Mark Strong, but he's just not quite on screen enough. But having a blast with it.
He's one I would say, I mean, he was definitely a name in 2010, but definitely took off more after this movie. The very next year would be his first turn as Magneto in X-Men First Class, but he was already in Inglourious Bastards before this and a lot of other small parts, so he was definitely a star on the rise. But looking back, I mean, it's just a lot of star power in this movie.
So weird.
Like, Will Arnett is in this movie, which I had no idea watching it, going into it, until he walks on screen. I'm like, is that? Yeah, that's Will Arnett. And he plays Lieutenant Grass. He plays a lieutenant in the army, and you're like waiting for the jokes. You're waiting for, okay, they cast Will Arnett in this role for a reason, right? And he really just plays it pretty straight. Even, I mean, we've talked about Will Arnett a lot on the show. He's in both the Michael Bay produced Turtles movies, and I always have to mention like his raspy voice that I can never tell if it's a character. It's not even that raspy. Like, watching him in this role, I'm like, wait a minute.
He's normal.
Is that a voice you're doing? Is it not really like that? But yeah, I mean, I don't really have much to say about his performance because
there's not much to it. He's only in a couple of scenes. But he's on screen probably less than 5 minutes, if that. Like, it's genuinely like a cameo almost. Like, it's really, it definitely adds to that credence that like there was way more to this movie at one point, and yeah, he's just barely in it, but he's playing it completely straight the whole time. So weird. Speaking
of barely in it, Michael Shannon. Another also, Mark Strong Award winner, greatest actor of all time. He's also in this movie for a matter of minutes.
Less than 5 minutes. He plays a guy that Jonah Hex just tracks down to shake out some information from, and literally, like 3 minutes maybe of time. It's so strange how much is packed into this movie. And I really would love to read that original script just to see like if all this stuff was supposed to go differently. But yeah, he's here and he's chewing the scenery in that brief little moment he's got.
Andrew, there's another Mark Strong Award winner in this movie, and they're not even credited for their role. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who won a Mark Strong Award back on our Watchmen episode for his turn as the comedian, plays Jeb Turnbull, who's the main villain's son who was killed by Jonah Hex. He's got a scene where Jonah Hex resurrects him, and they have a lengthy conversation. It's clearly Jeffrey Dean Morgan in a significant role, but he's uncredited, which is so bizarre to me. Usually, small roles that are uncredited, it's either that actor hasn't hit it big yet, or it's a really big name doing like a fun cameo, and they keep him out of the credits.
Right.
This is like he's a known name. This is after Watchmen. It's a role big enough to be credited, but He's not.
He's not.
I don't understand it, but yeah, halfway through this movie, you're like, oh, that's Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and what, his second of 4 DC appearances, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you got Watchmen, Jonah Hex, The Losers,
BVS.
BVS, and then he does Walking Dead to get his Image cred. Just needs a Marvel cred now. He's got it all.
Wow, he's not in the MCU yet, is he?
No, I don't think so.
All right, Andrew. Little fantasy cast here. Jeffrey Dean Morgan. He's going to be in the MCU. Who is he playing?
Oh God. He plays the Squadron Supreme's version of Batman.
Of course, everybody's been clamoring for it. It's all over the internet.
No, the joke I make all the time is that if Marvel really wanted to be petty, they would make a Squadron Supreme movie where the entire cast is just people who played the DC versions of the characters at some point in the past. But, people wanted Jeffrey Dean Morgan to be Flashpoint Batman at some point. So just make him the Squadron Supreme Batman.
Andrew, there's someone listening to this podcast right now that you just delivered the perfect joke. I don't quite understand the reference, but someone out there who's a bigger comic book nerd than me, I guess, they're like, yes, finally someone said it.
Said what? What? I don't know what I'm joking about.
I don't know. I understand none of this reference you're talking about. The Squadron Supreme Batman, I don't know.
Okay, the Squadron
You don't even
Supreme,
realize how obscure your references are. That's how deep you are in this, man.
The Squadron Supreme are Marvel's very thinly veiled analogs for the Justice League. So, it's not Superman, it's Hyperion. It's not Wonder Woman, it's Power Princess. It's not Batman, it's like Nighthawk. It's not Green Lantern, it's Dr. Spectrum. But it was a analog team originally introduced as villains just to give the Avengers a chance to fight the Justice League. So I always thought it would be funny, but they eventually introduced the hero version, and I always thought it'd be funny to make that if Marvel made that movie and just used old DC actors to play all the parts.
Perfect.
Just to really twist in the knife that I'm not gonna. That's #PP. I'm not gonna go there.
Hey, yeah, now that I understand the context, I got to give you your due.
Okay.
Andrew, oh, that's so good. Nailed it.
We're so funny.
All right. Well, that's our cast. That's our stat cast, full of Mark Strong Award winners, full of great actors. I think this might be a record for most Mark Strong Award winners.
You didn't even mention Lance Reddick. It's such a stat cast that Lance Reddick just fades into the background.
That's just true. Lance Reddick, who plays Smith, who's like the he's a blacksmith. Is that
supplier?
the joke?
The supplier, the I don't know.
The weapons dealer. Yeah.
Yeah, the Jonah Hex's supplier. He's Alfred to Jonah Hex's Batman. Creates all these weird weapons for him, or these weird advanced weapons that shouldn't be around for 100 years.
Yeah, he doesn't have a ton of screen time, but tons of charisma.
Yep, he's Lance Reddick.
All right, Andrew, let's jump into the scenes of this movie, this very short 81-minute movie. Let's talk about our favorite scenes, the best scenes in the movie, starting at the top, at the high point. Andrew, I'm going to throw it to you to kick us off. When is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in Jonah Hex?
I really do like the scene between Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Josh Brolin. It's a small scene. It's not, the longest thing in the world, but I like the dialogue a lot here because it kind of really dives into just a little bit of what this character is. So I'm going with this. It's a small scene. I like Jeffrey Dean Morgan, so obviously he could read the phone book and it would probably sound compelling. But, Jeffrey Dean Morgan's having this conversation with him where he's kind of like, he's kind of explaining to him that he's like, you're so blinded by vengeance for Turnbull that you kind of don't realize that you're essentially turning into him. You're just killing people to kind of cover up all the other insecurities in your life or all the other deficiencies, and you've basically lost track of who you are as a person. And I like it when we get a little introspective, and I like the way it kind of ends where he's just like, you're both gonna. He basically, like, Jeffrey Dean Morgan just kind of looks at him and kind of tells him, he's like, one of you guys is going down, and Josh Brolin's like, well, means you'll have some company real soon, one way or another. And Yeah, I just like the scene. It's a good one. Jonah Hex does not have this power in the comics. I don't know where it came from. Where they
I was
introduced
gonna,
it.
yeah, that was
Into
gonna be one of my questions because even though I'm
Yeah.
not super familiar with the character, I've never seen anything like this. So pretty interesting to give him
No,
such a
it's just specific power.
yeah.
When there's ways around it, like, because the only reason he uses it is to get information, and he could get that information any other way. But yeah, I like the scene. I like Jeffrey Dean Morgan, obviously. Josh Brolin and Jeffrey Dean Morgan back and forth, just chewing the scenery, basically. So yeah, I'm going with that.
Yeah, it's good. It's a simple scene. It's somewhere in the middle of this movie, and it's just sort of a break from the action. And it's like I said, just two actors in the middle of a cemetery at night. Good location
In the
for
dark.
it's very dark.
So
Good
dark.
location for for that introspective conversation. I like how it kind of challenges Jonah Hex. Jonah Hex is really like a force of nature in this movie. He's just lawless bounty hunter, like I said in the synopsis. And he has a bit of a character arc, kind of, and it stems from this conversation and him kind of realizing like revenge isn't. It's hard to even tell you like what lesson he learns, but there's a small change in him, I think, from sort of challenging, from Jeffrey D. Morgan's character challenging him on his motives, and at the end, I think he revisits him and after killing his dad, and is like, all right. Presumably, moving forward, he's a little bit more of a stronger emphasis on the hero and the anti-hero. He's a little bit more just motives for his killing in the future. Is kind of the impression I take. Well, yeah, from
because the lesson, like I said, the Jeffrey Morgan gives was like, you're so blinded by this need for vengeance or revenge or whatever you want to call it, that basically you've got nothing else at this point. So you're just blindly killing people until you kind of get what you want. And, it's the kind of realization that that thing of which you desire won't bring you the satisfaction that you think it will.
Well said.
That's a lesson. That's a lesson for all of us, really.
Yeah. My favorite scene in the movie is is gonna be what is essentially Jonah Hex's introduction. We kind of see his origin. We got an animated opening, but like the introduction to vigilante bounty hunter Jonah Hex. He pulls up to a small town. He's dragging 3 bodies, and he hands them over to the sheriff for his bounty. The sheriff says, "Oh, it's supposed to be 4 of them," and he throws him a wet bag, and inside that bag is the 4th man's head. So he wants to get all 4. But then this town tries to double cross him, and because there's an even greater bounty on Jonah Hex, so they're gonna mow down Jonah Hex and collect the bounties on all 5 of them. And they've even got 5 coffins laid out ready for this. Jonah Hex gets such a good line here. He says, 5 coffins. Sure you don't need 8? And then he mows them down with his guns. The big shootout. They have like a sniper try to take Jonah Hex out. The guns they use here. There's like I said, there's a machine gun. I mean, there's weapons that should not be in this time period. But regardless, it's a pretty traditional scene from that could work in most westerns. Lone gunman, bounty hunter, sheriff, double crossing, shootout in the middle of the road. And then as he rides off, he sets their building on fire and there's a big explosion. Like, it's just, again, in a box, like that scene alone, like you play that at like Comic-Con, it'd be like a good preview for this movie. It's like, oh yeah, I recognize that. That's Jonah Hex. That's a Western. That's a cool dialogue. It works. And most of this movie is not that simple. This movie gets pretty convoluted and they get really carried away with those weapons that shouldn't be there. And there's the hashtag PP. I'm trying. We're not gonna talk about that right now. But my favorite scene I like because it is simple and it does work, and it would work in almost any Western. And it comes early in the movie, and I think it's so hard not to make this a backhanded compliment. That's the highlight for me. I think that's when the movie is working best.
I was just going to say that I think it's a really good introduction to the character that I think you could have used in anything. Like, I think any movie where you're going to set up Jonah Hex as a character, a scene like this, I think is a really good way to do that. because you kind of you get all the information that you need presented, like you said, in just this like very simple package. He's the bounty hunter that took out 4 guys at once. He's ruthless because he cut the dude's head off because he wouldn't drag because his horse couldn't drag all the weight. When the guys that get up to turn on him, he stands up right to him, doesn't run away, doesn't do anything. He faces them head on, takes care of everything, and then just because you can't leave it alone, he blows the place up on his way out. Like it's a perfect like just bit by bit introduction to all the facets of the character that you need to understand. And like I said, I think you could do a version of this scene in, like I said, any Jonah Hex situation, and it would be a really good setup. So I do agree. It's a great scene. It's, as far as introduction scenes for characters, it hits all the points it needs to.
There's another scene a little bit later on. It's a little bit too short to call it my favorite scene, but it's hitting sort of the same note. And Jonah Hex is at a bar, drinking by himself, and these 2 guys are getting drunk and they want to mess with him. And you kind of hear their dialogue, like, yeah, he ain't so tough. And one of them walks over to stand up to him. And he says, "Hey, Hex, what happened to your face?" And as soon as the word face comes out, as soon as he finishes that sentence, he gets blasted through the window of the saloon by Jonah Hex with a handgun that was hidden under his hat. Just doesn't even look up at him, just shoots him. And it's very much like an homage, like spaghetti westerns. Like just the way he just flies out that window, the same way Quentin Tarantino would do with that homage in like Django Unchained. Like he just, it makes no sense for a handgun to shoot somebody that far out the window, but it's hilarious. It's a good comedic beat. It's, again, very informative of who Jonah Hex is as a character, and it's classic Western stuff because like the saloon goes silent for a while, and then the piano kicks back up, and everybody goes on business as usual. Just all the stuff we see in classic Westerns.
Perfect.
Yeah, they nail it in that little scene. It's pretty good.
I agree. I think it does exactly what it needs to do. It's a fun little aside. You get Hex you get just that glimpse of Hex in like a normal such as normal is in this world. But yeah, it's another good one. Like again, we're just setting up exactly what this character is and how he operates.
And we said it earlier talking about Josh Brolin, but his flat, plain, matter-of-fact delivery, like it makes so much sense. Him being cast as young Agent K in Men in Black 3 is some of the greatest casting ever. Like, because Tom Lee Jones also does that plain, matter-of-fact delivery, and he can just nail that cadence. Like, whenever the army comes to recruit him, he says the line that I use in the intro, "Get lost or get dead." Like, just super plain, matter-of-fact. Yep. Like, it's a cool line, but he doesn't have to, like, put anything on it to make it cool. It's just the way he's so calm about it is what makes it badass. Yeah, it's great. It's good stuff. Like, whatever is working or not working in this movie, Josh Brolin as Jonah Hex is 100% working.
I agree. I think it speaks a little bit because Brolin initially said that he hated this script, but he kind of grew to like what he called like tongue-in-cheek nature of it. Now, I don't think a lot of that tongue-in-cheek nature comes through in the final film, but I can see how he's playing the role that way. Like, he's playing it like I said, extremely flat, matter-of-factly, just kind of playing off the ridiculous things that happen around him. And stuff like that, I think, is a good example of just how Brolin was approaching the role of just, like, with Hex, everything is just kind of matter-of-fact. There's very little more to this character. Like, he's not a guy with deep motivations. He's not a guy with, like, a rich tapestry of motivations and hidden desires. This guy's pretty straightforward. And I like it. I think it's a good way to play it. And like I said, that's kind of why I wouldn't be sad at all if we found ourselves in a scenario where Brolin was going to play the character again.
I super appreciate in the opening credits of this movie, there's the Warner Brothers logo. And then there's the usual music that accompanies it, but it's like old-timey Western music, like it's themed to the movie. I always love little touches like that in the opening credits, but that old-timey theme quickly gives away to rock music, because the score of this movie is by the metal band Mastodon, which is pretty badass. Like, one of my favorite parts about this movie is the score. It's really good. Yep. I'm a big fan of Mastodon. I've got most of their work. I've seen them live a few times, and you can tell that it's a metal band, a rock band, doing the score to this movie, and it's a strange choice, but I think it mostly works. And while you kind of were mentioning a second ago, like maybe the final product of this movie doesn't quite nail the tone that was maybe intended, that it's a Western, but there's modern machinery and it's over the top, but it's supposed to be tongue in cheek. It doesn't always come across, but I think the score is doing its part to help it come across.
Yeah. It's doing some heavy lifting. That score is doing a lot of lifting. It's a great score, genuinely. Like, honestly, I could listen to that probably on its own, just because they really do bring in a variety of influences. The guys in Mastodon kind of spoke about it a little bit, how they would go with like almost a Pink Floyd vibe at certain scenes of the movie, trying to do things. A little bit of Neil Young influence, just kind of going through and through, trying to make something that really flowed with the movie. And I think by and large, it's very successful. I think it's just really, it's a very good score.
Yeah, it's an hour of music all told. So it's another Mastodon album, basically.
Yeah,
it's an instrumental Mastodon album.
It's pretty cool.
Now, Andrew, what do you think about the animated opening? So we have live action at first, because we have a very brutal scene where John Malkovich's character is burning Jonah Hex's home while Jonah Hex is tied up to some planks, so he can't do anything about it. And his wife and kids are inside, and you don't see anything, but you hear him screaming. Like, it's a pretty downer way to start the movie. And then after that, we get like this animated sequence that shows Jonah Hex getting revived, getting his powers, sweeping through the desert western landscape. What do you think about that, Andrew?
It seemed a little jarring at first, because you have this very like brutal, real opening, and then you shift into this like animated. It was a very like, I don't think an animated intro would have been like bad, but I think the way they ran it all together was a little strange. It just created a very like odd, kind of like jarring transition, going from like, oh, you just watched Jonah Hex family get brutally murdered by John Malkovich. Now let's have an animated intro. And it's like, what? Who? No, I don't want it. But yeah, a little strange.
It reminds me of Watchmen a little bit. It reminds me of like a motion comic, which I always associate with Watchmen, because I don't know, that's really big at the time, and there's a lot of motion comics based on Watchmen at the time, because it's not quite traditional animation. It's like still images that slide across the screen. It's just this very weird style of animation that, yeah, it's a bit jarring, but I guess on its own, it's not too bad.
Yeah, sure.
So Will Arnett, we mentioned he's in this movie, and again, when he walks on my screen, I'm like, that's Will Arnett in a uniform, and I'm expecting, like, that's a weird place to put some comedic relief. And literally, Andrew, this is his first line in the movie. He's talking to the president, and he says, "Sir, as you know, my unit is the very best." but it's not supposed to be a joke. But I'm like, oh, wait, is that funny? Is that it? No, he's talking about his actual unit of men, and then he has a few other scenes, and it's just Will Arnett. Comes. It's so weird.
It's so weird. I genuinely don't. It's like I said, I'm curious. I haven't really looked to see if there's like a script out there for this or anything, but I'm curious. I'm curious how different it is. Because there's been a few movies where like you see the final product and there's like an older script floating around, and you can kind of see that original idea. Whether it's better or worse, that's a different question, a different discussion. But I'd be interested, just because this feels so like condensed. There's definitely movies like this I've seen where like you've got this like big cast and there's big names that are only there for a matter of minutes, and you're just kind of like, there's no way they like signed on to a big budget, big movie just to be on screen for 3 minutes, right? Like, there's no way that's true, but who knows?
There's got to be some stories there. Let's talk about the climax of this movie. So, John Malkovich, Quentin, I should say, QT, same initials as Quentin Tarantino. In fact, he brands Jonah Hex's face in the beginning of this movie, and like you see the brand as QT, and that's the first thing I think of is like Quentin Tarantino. It's also a truck stop here in Texas, so maybe some people think of that. But I guess all unintentional, but I couldn't I couldn't help but think of Quentin Tarantino when I saw that brand. But at any rate, his they sort of tie history into this here. There's a super weapon that was designed by Eli Whitney, who revolutionized firearms
Industry.
for the country. Yeah, and it was so powerful that they decided not to actually go through with making it. But he steals the plans and the parts to build it himself. And all that backstory where it's like pseudo history, it reminds me so much of Wild Wild West, because that's exactly what that movie does, bringing in like steampunk / modern technology into the Wild West, and a lot of what if scenarios with history. And I don't know if that's the movie you want to be compared to, but that's absolutely what it made me think of. But man, him just laying out his master plan as a villain, John Malkovich's delivery. I love this line. He says, "On the 4th of July, the United States of America will know hell." Because he plans on attacking them on the 100-year anniversary of the country. And it's, why exactly? I don't know. He's an evil man. What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? It's very interesting because like Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which was like a huge, it was a key invention in the Industrial Revolution just because it made the processing of cotton go so much faster. And so the idea is that the government thought that was such a revolutionary invention, they hired him to develop weapons, essentially. So it's like, hey, you invented that machine that gets seeds out of cotton. Do you want to make weapons for us? Like, just that jump is just very, 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 this historical fiction, as it's called. That's not at all out of the question. They always do things like that. But yeah, it's interesting that they essentially build this idea that, like, Whitney designed this plan, but then they didn't do it because it was too powerful. So then, obviously, Malkovich's character is like, well, I'm just going to build it anyway. Because, I guess you just leave that stuff laying around. But it's a very odd weapon. There's like a lot of pieces to it. Like you launch, it's basically a shrapnel weapon, and it's a very kind of complicated thing. It's very, like, I mean, they keep showing it in action, and every single time I still wasn't entirely sure what was happening. Like, it's just not something that makes a lot of sense. But basically, they launch a bunch of like regular looking cannonballs, and then they send in this glowy Dragon Ball looking thing. And then
it's exactly what it looks like.
And then it blows up and blows up all the cannonballs. And, it's like a giant version of like a shrapnel grenade is how it just kind of comes off. And maybe that's the point. I'm not sure. But either way, the final kind of plan for Turnbull is to do this like during the 100-year celebration in Washington, D.C. Wall Grant is there because Ulysses S. Grant is a character in this movie. Played by Aidan Quinn. Who was only on set for 3 days, apparently. Which makes sense. I mean, he's not in a lot of it. I could easily see them shooting his stuff in 3 days. But yeah, so we get our big moment where Hex has to show up and stop these guys. And we get some fun stuff here. This is where, like I said, Megan Fox gets a little bit of a chance to do some of the thrashing herself.
I like Michael Fassbender's character. I like his death, Burke's death, because as we've established, Jonah Hex, his power is to talk to the dead, but not just like spirits wandering around. He needs to physically touch their corpse, and their corpse reanimates and talks, and then he can send them back. It's very strange, but he uses that very interestingly against Burke because he kills him once, and then lets his body drop. And then grabs his body back to bring him back, and then kills him again. So, like, he uses his power to kill Burke twice.
It's pretty brutal, but cool.
Pretty brutal. No,
brutal, but cool. The power is so strange because the idea that they kind of established throughout the film is that if he does it too long, the body starts to burn, basically. And the fresher, quote unquote, the body is, the faster they burn.
There's a lot of rules to this power.
There's a lot of rules because the guy he grabs earlier on has been dead for a little while, but not a long time. So he starts to burn up, and then he lets him go, and he has some really weird, ominous speech about like, "Oh, those are the hellhounds coming for you. I wouldn't try and pet them." And then like lets him go, and it's saying, And then when he touches Jeffrey Dean Morgan, like it's a far more minor thing. Like at one point he's like, I'm starting to burn. More like of an inconvenience, just like, I got mud on my shoes. Like that kind of thing. He's been dead long enough. And then with Burke, because he's literally, I guess, like just dead, he like grabs him and he immediately starts burning up. So he punches him and he blows up. And I'm like, all right, if you're gonna go, what a way to go.
Yeah.
You get wherever you're going. I died twice. What have you done with your afterlife?
And then he of course kills Quentin. He gets his neck stuck in like a gear to hold him in place, and then of course blows the whole damn thing up. So he is gone. He gets his revenge, and that's our film. That's our very short film. Boy, there is I think we've hit all the high points. I mean,
right.
The performances that stand out. Jonah Hex is very good. There's a few key scenes that genuinely work and would work in any movie, but what a weird thing this is.
I love it at the end. President Grant tries to make Jonah Hex the sheriff of the entire country. Like, doesn't even try to create like a government position. He's just like, and it's this comically oversized badge too. Like it's just this, like, it's like the size of your friggin' like whole hand. And he's like, oh, and Hex even says, I don't think you make a sheriff for a whole country. And it's pretty ridiculous. But yeah, it's a weird movie. I wouldn't say it's strange that it exists, like, because they always, comic book movies were in vogue. This isn't something like a Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd movie where you're just kind of like, wow, of all the things for 1990, the mid 90s to make, we made a Judge Dredd movie starring Sylvester Stallone. Like, the character had been going through a kind of comic resurgence for a while leading up to this. So it really wasn't a shock that this was potentially something they saw as a small budget, even though $47 million is still a lot of money to spend on a Jonah Hex movie. I would have expected this to be something you could have done for like sub 20, but, yeah, what we ended up getting just feels like, this is going to sound backhand too. It's like they weren't sure what the movie should be. So it ended up like, it feels like it got shifted and changed around.
Yeah, we can't just make a Western.
Josh Brolin's already making one of those this year. But like, just genuinely like an odd, the result is very odd because it just feels like there's stuff missing, honestly. Like, it just feels like,
yeah.
You're not necessarily not getting enough of the story to figure out what's going on, but just with all the cast, all the characters, everything going on, it just feels like there's a lot more that was there.
The extent of my Jonah Hex knowledge, the most I've ever dove into the character, is an episode of Batman the Animated Series. In that universe, Jonah Hex is the son or grandson of Ra's al Ghul, who is now, in the modern day, very, very old man, and Ra's, who's been rejuvenating himself, takes him in to take care of him in his final years. But most of that episode is a flashback to the Old West, and it's just a Jonah Hex story. And it's one of my least favorite episodes of the series, usually, because like when I watch Batman the Animated Series, I'm not in the mood to watch like a Western, but it's like this whole episode is just a Western starring Jonah Hex, and it's not a bad episode, but it's pretty jarring to watch in sequence with all the other episodes. But at any rate, that's my knowledge of Jonah Hex. I know that he is a gunman in the Old West, and he's got this gnarly scar on his cheek where I guess the signature thing is like there's a piece of skin on his upper cheek that crosses his lips to his lower cheek. That's like his thing. Which, how perfect for, I imagine anyone else playing the character would have a hard time like learning to speak without moving your teeth, but like that's how Josh Brolin speaks.
That's how Josh Brolin talks.
Yeah. I don't know why mine came out like Holly Hunter, but yeah, that's how he already talks that way. So it worked out.
Yeah, if you want to do a Josh Brolin impression, just speak without moving your teeth. You understand me?
It also works for Clint Eastwood. It's a Western thing.
Face down.
That's all I know about Jonah Hex. He's a gunman in the West. So you're telling me he doesn't have the supernatural powers that they show in this movie? How does this movie function as an adaptation of the character, Andrew? Like, do you learn anything about the source material by watching this movie?
No, you do. Like there's like pieces of this are right. Like Jonah Hex, Quentin Turnbull, Tallulah. I almost said Tallulah Bankhead, which is not the name. Black. Tallulah Bankhead is somebody else entirely. But like Tallulah Black, Quentin Turnbull, Jonah Hex, even Jeb Turnbull. Those are from the comics. Quentin is his long time nemesis. So there's pieces, obviously. The power is just a strange, weird thing. Obviously, like the super advanced weaponry, that's another thing that's just kind of out there. You don't really understand why they're doing it. I mean, the comics really, he's just a gunman with a jacked up face. Like, it's pretty straightforward. But in the end, I just feel like, people see you're making a superhero movie or a comic book movie, and the studio just maybe felt like there was a higher expectation. Hell, there's a run of Jonah Hex where he ends up in a post-apocalyptic future. I mean, the comic has done some weird stuff. I'm not going to pretend it hasn't, but at no point does he suddenly get a power to communicate with the dead. Oddly enough, the guys that kind of revitalized it, Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, they kind of revitalized Jonah Hex in the late aughts, and they actually published a graphic novel to tie into the film that was called Jonah Hex No Way Back, where the original Jonah Hex artist, Tony DeZanuga, came back to draw like a graphic novel. And that's actually like really great. It's very straightforward. It's not there's no powers, there's no weird shifts, but it's a very cool graphic novel. So the Justin Gray, Jimmy Palmiotti, Jonah Hex is definitely something worth investigating if you kind of want to get what the character's all about. And yeah, but as an adaptation, we're definitely taking there's definitely like a general idea, but we take some far steps outside.
Josh Brolin rules, though.
Josh Brolin rules in general. That dude tries to kill him in the Goonies, and he doesn't even try to kill him back.
Well, that's got to be the shortest movie we've covered on. It's legitimately like a short film. Like, I don't know where the line is between short film and feature length, but like, I feel like there's 70-minute short films, and this is 10 minutes longer than that with credits.
The only thing I think we've watched that even comes close would be Men in Black 2, which is 88 minutes.
Oh, yeah, that one was really short, too. I had a lot of stuff cut out of it for various reasons as well, but yeah. Interesting stuff.
Interesting.
What a movie. I am now a man who has seen the movie Jonah Hex.
I'm now a man who has seen the movie Jonah Hex twice.
Well, you know what time it is, Andrew? It's time for our question of the week. We're going to take a look at our Discord here, where you can submit questions for us to read on the back end of these episodes. And this week's question comes from Groffles. And you know what? Groffles recently posted that he is a new dad. So congratulations, Groffles.
Congratulations to you.
The baby girl is adorable. Being a dad is awesome. But the question that he sent us is, have you ever listened to radio plays, audiobooks, or the modern version with podcasts? And if so, well, I have listened to podcasts for the record. If so, do you prefer story narration or acting with voice work and Foley artistry? Very interesting. So basically, like an audiobook, you can listen to someone literally reading the word for word from the pages. Or, well, I guess that's always the case, but there can also be Foley artists. So like, you hear the wind blowing in the background, if that's key to the scene, or somebody setting something down on a table and it's sort of like listening in on a live play maybe would be the closest. Yeah. So I guess the idea that's a little bit more immersive. So do you think the sound effects and stuff help you immerse in the story, or do you find it distracting, Andrew? Or do you listen to this stuff at all?
I have listened to audiobooks, and I think they're fine. With an audiobook, it's really, for me, it's I almost just know what I'm expecting when I go in. So like if I'm an audiobook, I know he's just going to read it. I know I'm probably going to get some different voices, but by and large, it's just the reading of a book. But I have listened to some radio dramas because when I was in college, I took an audio production class where we had to make a radio drama. And like you had to do like the sound effects and everything to kind of build out the world. So I remember listening to some old episodes of Have Gun, Will Travel. And I just thought that was, I like that immersion, kind of just I'm I'm physically listening to the events happening. So I've always kind of enjoyed that because it does feel a little bit more immersive. I haven't really listened to a lot of stuff where there is narration, like where they just like narrate the gaps instead of like just filling it in. I mean, I don't imagine I'd have a problem with it, but for me personally, I think I prefer the like listening to the live version of it, the Foley effects, the all that. I think I personally would prefer that.
I think I'm with you, but I have never listened to an audiobook. I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've ever listened to, like, classic book on tape, whatever. So for me, the closest thing is going to be podcasts, which I'm trying to think, like Serial. I think everybody listens to Serial podcasts, and that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like Foley work, but there's a lot of like recording on location. And so you do get all the sound effects and the environmental noise and everything. And that definitely helps. And so I think I'm with you. I'm leaning towards like, I mean, to me, I feel like if there's Foley work and stuff, that equates to like higher production value, which is usually a good thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, like someone just narrating sort of the scenery. I guess that's what a book is, though. I mean, a book is just they give you the words and you put it all together in your mind. So I guess I can't really say anything negative about that. But if I'm absorbing the story through my ears, I want to get the most out of it with sound effects and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna agree with you, Andrew.
Yeah.
Great question, Groffles. It's so specific. I love the specificity of specificity. Help me out, Andrew. I'm drowning. What's the word I'm looking for?
Specificity.
Yeah. Like that. I love how specific that question was. And if you've got a question that would be fun for us to answer on the backgammon of an episode, jump into our Discord. There's a link in the show notes if you're not there already. And you can ask us questions. You can write in about movies we're going to cover in the future, so we can read that on an episode as well. You can just hang out with the community, talk movies, talk baseball. Baseball season's in full effect. Our sports channel is blowing up with some smack talk here recently. So join us. We're here all the time. And until then, remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch of Depressed to Impress for the music. Check him out on YouTube and Twitch.tv. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It is the only way we're going to grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. Hey, yeah, now that I understand the context, I got to give you your due.
Okay. Is the child all right?
I hope so.